Today I'm going to talk about a paper, science paper, that came out not long ago, which kind of marks like a historic moment for me. Why? Number one, it's because this publication reports the longest known circulation of spike protein post-vaccination. And number two, they look at vaccinated people who ended up having a disease soon post-vaccination, very similar to long COVID, and they call that post-vaccination syndrome. And as far as I know, it's the first paper that decided to analyze such unfortunate patients and call it that disease. And they were finally looking into this. What is going on with these people? So extremely valuable information. On top of that, there's also an interesting piece of information that they presented that made me wonder if it's giving us a hint as to what the mysterious IgG4 antibodies that we see in pretty much all of the mRNA vaccinated individuals. And we'll get to that right away. My name is Dr. Mikołaj Raszek of Merogenomics. Let's get going. So what I like about these guys is that they mentioned that this condition that they refer to as post-vaccination syndrome is only observed in select individuals. That's exactly how I see it as well, because basically those are the individuals that did not have compatible biology with vaccine. And this is actually normal and expected as a potential risk with any vaccination. And the reason why is because the negative outcome has nothing to do with the vaccine, but more like with your genetics, how your immune system response is programmed by your own genetics. Okay, so I thought that's a very appropriate term of phrasing it, because obviously vaccines helped a lot of people, especially the very high risk groups. But for some people who did not have compatible biology, it became a problem. But they mentioned that, look, the issue here is that this condition, post-vaccine syndrome, is completely ignored by medicine right now. And as a consequence of that, it's totally not studied. And we don't have any care or support for these unfortunate affected people, right? So this is very valuable that they're finally looking into something like that. Because medicine is still currently ignoring this, we don't know what the actual clinical causes of this disorder are, but scientists have been proposing ideas for a while now. Scientists are always ahead of medical establishment, and they recount some of those propositions for us. So one of them is, for example, that the vaccine components, such as either the genetic material, mRNA, or the lipid nanoparticles, could be activating pattern recognition receptors. Now, what are these pattern recognition receptors? These are these receptors we have all over our body in order to recognize something that is either foreign or abnormal to us. And this is part of the earliest immune system responses that we have encoded in us, and perhaps vaccine components activate this too much, and we end up with something akin to like chronic inflammation. So that's proposition number one. Another one is when we were building vaccine with the spike protein at the time, we didn't really know what the spike protein does inside our body, with exception, of course, targeting the ACE2 receptor in order to, say, help virus enter into our cells. Besides that, we didn't really know much, and we're hoping it would be totally benign. Well, as the time went on, it turned out that spike protein is not benign at all. That was a gamble, and that didn't work out in our favor. And now another proposition is that perhaps the spike protein, now we know we can interact with a variety of different molecules inside our body. And it's this interaction, this complicated interaction with many different molecules, that produces the disease symptoms, okay? And then the last one is that potentially the vaccines were inducing a form of autoimmune response. That's a typical risk with any induction of the immune system, whether it's a vaccination or natural infection. So that's the standard. All right, so these are the propositions why. So these guys wanted to go into deeper information. What did they do? They basically had 42 individuals who have this post-vaccine syndrome. So they have these specific symptoms, and we'll talk about that right away. And almost all of them, 40 out of those 42, some of them were infected, but of those who were infected, they were only infected after vaccination, and it's the vaccination that produced the first symptoms of disease. Okay, so that's key. Infection was not a role here in producing the symptoms. The symptoms, as you'll see right away, showed up very soon after vaccination, and they contrasted those with 22 individuals who were controls. Those were people who were vaccinated but were completely healthy. So for them, vaccine worked perfectly as desired, as it was wanted, which basically the individuals got immune protection and they still were completely healthy. So perfect. All right, so and they did this in 2023, the measurements throughout that year. This is why it allowed the authors to look at the duration of some of the circulating spike protein in these individuals post last encounter of spike protein, which could either come from vaccine or infection, and that range anywhere between 30 days to 830 days, roughly, give or take, okay? And this is why it allowed them to observe what was the longest duration post-vaccination, which was almost 2 years. And again, we'll talk about that right away. Then they divided those two groups of people into those who were infected versus those who were not infected. So those who had the post-vaccination syndromes who were either infected or not, and those healthy controls who were either infected or not. And again, we'll see that's important for our analysis. So the very first thing they wanted to take a look at is, of course, what are these people afflicted with? What are the symptoms? So let's break that down, and you can see how similar it is to potentially long COVID. So the number one symptom that these people were complaining about was fatigue. This was followed by a feeling of numbness or tinglingness. And then last one was exercise intolerance. And all of these that I just mentioned were reported in the 80th percentile, so 80% or more of the individuals that were screened reported these symptoms. Next one was brain fog, difficulty to focus, insomnia, neuropathy, and as well as muscle pain, and all of these were reported in the 70%. So 70% or more of these individuals were reporting these, okay? Up to 80%. And then the last two that I'll mention was anxiety and tinnitus, which were reported in the 60th percentile, and tinnitus especially more common in men than women. But if you wanted to see there's a lot more symptoms, they provided this very cool figure where you can see how many different symptoms they were screening or people actually mentioned. So if you yourself are suspecting that perhaps you might have post-vaccination syndrome, you can take a look at what kind of symptoms these people were featuring and where you might fall into the category. And if you look at that group, there's a couple of things that will stand out to you. Number one is that women are more often represented than men. So there's more women in the study than men. And we've already documented on that before when we did a video on how vagus nerve activation might be helping with treatment of long COVID. And so that, which was done specifically for women, because women are also more likely to experience long COVID. And I did a video follow-up on that might explain as to why, and this had to do with potential of that could have been with the iron deficiency. So check out that video as well. And personally, I think that the vagus nerve is absolutely linked in all of this, whether it's long COVID or post-vaccination syndrome. And the reason why, because in my head, vagus nerve is simply the relay of information of your state of your body to the brain. And therefore, you can actually manipulate that information. This is where that becomes interesting. Anyway, moving forward. That's number one you see, and the other one you would see is that not only is there more women, but also women tend to exhibit more symptoms than men. So again, check out that figure if you wanted to see if any of these symptoms might apply to you. Okay, then the next thing that these guys wanted to assess is basically what is the overall health status of these individuals, and it's not good. Those people who have this post-vaccination syndrome, overall, they're not doing very well. So what do I mean by that? They measure a variety of different performance metrics, and people with post-vaccination syndromes, overall, their physical performance scores were lower than the controls that they studied. Anxiety scores were higher than in controls. Those who had post-vaccination syndrome, they also had depression scores higher than controls. They had fatigue scores higher than controls. Those with post-vaccination syndrome had insomnia scores higher than controls, and overall level of pain physical pain overall higher than controls. Basically, the take-home message is these people are suffering. They're not doing very well. They're way below what would be considered the average, normal, healthy American human being. Okay, so that they're just not doing. I'm laughing at the way how I phrased it, obviously, because it was silly or awkward. Not over the pain. So that's unfortunate, but that's basically what it is. So next thing what they did is what they measured is they looked at what kind of cells are circulating in immune cells circulating in their body. Now this is important because of one critical finding, so I wanted to mention it. One thing that they observed is that the people with the post-vaccination syndrome have more circulating what is referred to as non-classical monocytes. Now this has been previously observed and documented, but only once. I did a video on this long time ago. So this is, to my knowledge, only the second documentation that I've seen that looked into this. Now, the reason why this is key, potentially really important, is because in that previous study I just mentioned that they did this, those studies up to now were some of the longest reported spike protein studies done. The longest prior to that report was 1.5 years. These guys in the paper that I'm talking about today beat it because they made it almost to 2 years. And what are these monocytes? So these non-classical monocytes, well, first of all, monocytes are immune cells that are produced by your bone marrow. It can go out into your body, and then these monocytes are supposed to differentiate into 2 different types of immune cells. So differentiate, basically they are transformed into another form. So basically monocytes are like a little precursor before they adopt a different state. One of them is macrophages. Macrophages basically are spread out throughout your entire body, and they're making sure that your body is functioning properly. That's macrophages, what they'll do. And the other ones are dendritic cells, and the magic behind dendritic cells is their superpower is that they can swallow up a pathogen and present a fragment of that pathogen to your immune system and tell the immune system, hey, look at this, these jerks attacked us, now we got to get rid of those jerks, okay, i.e. pathogen. Okay, so that's what dendritic cells will do. And monocytes normally will achieve that very rapidly. They transform into either this macrophage or dendritic cell quite quick, with a matter of like just few days at most. But in this previous paper, these authors noticed that these non-classical monocytes can absorb spike protein, and somehow they can last for a very long time, like hundreds of days, something abnormal than that, and de facto become like a reservoir for the spike protein, and might explain the mystery as to why do we see this spike protein in people for so long. It's complete mystery. So this could be one of the reasons why. Another one that I've also discussed previously is that the bacteria potentially could be another long-term reservoir for the spike protein. So check that out. So here is a second confirmation of these type of non-classical monocytes being observed and as elevated in the people who have this post-vaccine syndrome. The only other immune cell type that I'll mention that they observed are the fact that the post-vaccine syndrome individuals had elevated levels of what is referred to as exhausted CD8 T cells. Now these are T cells that are killer T cells. That type of T cells will destroy all abnormal cells in your body. They can, if once detected, they'll destroy it. So it's one of the ways of maintaining healthy design of your tissues and so on. And clearly, once they're exhausted, they don't really do that anymore. So exhaustion of the T cells is not a good thing. So that's unfortunate that we're seeing that. Basically, we're talking about that the immune system got exhausted. It's used up. So that's another thing that they're saying. But really what we want to now talk about is the spike protein. That's one of the common denominators between both the long COVID, which is caused by infection of virus, and the post-vaccine syndrome. And basically, right, because what is one thing that is in common between those two is the spike protein, and long circulation of spike protein has also been observed in long COVID individuals as well. So they did measure the circulating spike protein levels in all of these people, both the people with post-vaccination syndrome and controls. And what they observed is following, that approximately 50% of people did show in both groups showed, in total, showed circulating spike protein. But when they showed us the circulation spike protein on this graph, notice the two colors on the graph, this light brown colors, which represents people that have the post-vaccination syndrome but were never infected, versus purple, which are people with post-vaccination syndrome and infected. And you can clearly see that these two colors show up as most frequently showing circulating spike protein, and the levels are much higher. You can also see the duration of how long the spike protein was detected post last encounter with the spike protein by our body, which was either vaccination or infection, and that range anywhere between 30 days to 830 days. And you can see that the largest amount of circulating spike protein was in an individual that was almost 710 days after last vaccine. This is how we now getting this almost 2 years of circulating spike protein post last vaccination, and that person was not even infected, right? So that's very interesting. And then clearly on a graph next to that, you can see that people with post-vaccination syndrome not only are far more frequently to represent circulating spike protein, but also larger amounts. And you can also see, and this is another very important, interesting observation, is that those who show circulating spike protein also tend to show it that the last spike protein was presented a long time ago to them via either vaccination or infection. And why is that important? Is because of the next finding that is very, very crucial and sort of like a conundrum or mystery. And the authors could not explain that. They kind of were like, we don't know what to say here, so we're just gonna ignore the topic. And what they observed is this weird pattern that they did not expect. When they focused on people who had the post-vaccination syndrome, but who were never infected, so let's just take the infection out of the equation here. What they noticed is that in that group of people, those who had circulating spike protein in their blood had actually lower amounts of antibodies against the spike protein than people who had the post-vaccine syndrome and didn't have any circulating spike protein. So that's a bit of a conundrum. That's basically counterintuitive, because the reason why, or a mystery, the reason why is because you would expect the exact opposite, because circulating spike protein should be inducing the immune system to respond. So why is it not? And if you've been following my channel for a while, you know very well I studied these IgG4 antibodies that we know that practically all mRNA vaccinated individuals produce these antibodies against the spike protein. And what these antibodies typically do, they build tolerance to what they target, meaning they mask whatever they target from recognition by the immune system, meaning the immune system is not recognizing. So perhaps, while these authors did not look into the subtypes of those antibodies targeting spike protein, but most likely, almost certainly, part of those antibodies would be IgG4, because this is what is seen all the time, all over the world. And by the way, I'll be making more videos on that topic. I'll update you with some of the latest science on that as well. And perhaps it's those IgG4 antibodies mask the spike protein from recognition by the immune system. And this is why such individuals no longer see antibodies against the spike protein. So that may be an explanation. We don't know, because that wasn't investigated by the authors, but I can tell you that this is a conundrum also in the studies related to the IgG4 antibodies in the mRNA vaccinated individuals, which is, the question is, well, are these good or bad to the vaccinated individuals? Because on the one hand, it's very well understood that these antibodies will prevent immune response, and therefore it will not clear the spike protein. So that obviously sounds like it's bad, but on the other hand, it also prevents the spike protein from being able to reach its targets, and perhaps that's good. Well, this might explain to us that overall it might not be good, and the reason why it might not be good is because it might allow long-term circulation of the spike protein, which might cause other issues, because this is what we're seeing in these individuals with post-vaccination syndrome. They also tested for other few things, so let me wrap it up really quickly. They also showed that people with post-vaccination syndrome had higher levels of Epstein Epstein-Barr virus antibodies targeting specific protein of that virus. So that suggests that they had recent reactivation of that virus in these individuals, like an opportunistic problem in these individuals. And then finally, they also showed that these people had higher levels of autoantibodies. And by the way, if you want to understand the Epstein-Barr virus, how it can come out of its latency or its sleep mode into activation, check out my past videos on Justin Bieber. All right, so then what is their overall summary? What did they decide to conclude with? They suggest the following that leads to the post-vaccination syndrome. And number one is obviously the continuous problem of the circulating spike protein. This is, like, as I mentioned, already observed in that one video I discussed with the monocytes, where both the elevated monocytes as well as longer term duration of spike protein has been already observed, right? So they stick to that. That's one issue. The second one they mentioned is likely the spike protein contributes to a problem via formation of microclots that are very resistant to degradation. So they decided to focus on that. That's one of the earliest investigations I've done. I've done a very large series showing how spike protein might be forming these clots. Some amazing science there. So check out those series. Lots of pictures showing under microscope how spike protein might be inducing these very alien looking clots. Very visual science to look at. And the reason why I think the authors might be correct in focusing on this is because another thing is, I mentioned autoantibodies that they're observing in post-vaccination syndrome individuals that are elevated. Well, those are also have been proposed to lead to microclots as well. Check out that video. And then finally, the monocytes I just mentioned, the authors who previously observed that as well, they have also suggested before that these monocytes, non-classical monocytes that carry spike protein, could also lead to clot formation. So check out that video for background information and for that explanation. And the last thing that they also mentioned, of course, the other thing that you need for that perfect storm in order for people to induce that disorder, the post-vaccination syndrome, is that elevated Epstein-Barr virus concentration. So there you go, the first study that looked into quite a bit of details as to what might be happening. Very important study. So I loved it because we're finally getting to the bottom of as to what might be happening, and we need this type of information. They mentioned there's only 3 studies so far prior to them that they could find or they reported that looked into anything related to vaccinated injured individuals, and one of them was that monocyte study. So very seldomly touched topic in sciences, which is unfortunate because these people are suffering and we need to find out what's going on. So very welcome study. Please subscribe and like and leave a comment. This is how we grow. And also check out our Patreon account, where we basically, if you are willing to be a supporting patron, then you get to pre-screen all these videos first, and you get to vote as to what stuff comes out on this channel. All right, and you get extra perks as well. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye everyone.